Today, we will be taking a look at the relationship between artificial sweeteners and cancer. The research question for today is: does the intake of artificial sweeteners, specifically aspartame, increase the risk of cancer? The reason I chose this topic is because I've noticed an increase of products being marketed as sugar-free or zero sugar. However, these products are sweet, meaning that they have to be sweetened with something, and that something is artificial sweeteners. These sugar-free products are being marketed as healthier than the alternative with sugar, but are these alternative sugars actually healthy? My goal is to convince people to reduce their intake of artificial sweeteners and find healthier alternatives. So what is an artificial sweetener? When you walk into a grocery store, you will see so many products being marketed as sugar-free, which means these products contain some sort of artificial sweetener. And often people opt for this because they see it as healthier than an option with sugar. An artificial sweetener, or a non-sugar sweetener, is a type of chemical compound that is used to replace sugar in many different foods and beverages. The reason these chemical compounds are used to replace sugar is because they are zero calorie, so they are often seen in low calorie foods, which is why they continue to pop up more and more in grocery stores. You might see artificial sweeteners in puddings, cereals, frozen desserts, and so much more. As companies try to add less sugar into foods to make them appear healthier, they are replacing sugar with these artificial sweeteners. Artificial sweeteners that you might be seeing on food labels include acesulfame potassium, advantame, cyclamates, saccharin, steviol glycosides, sucralose, and one of the most common artificial sweeteners that you probably see, aspartame. Let's take a closer look at what aspartame really is. Aspartame is one of the world's most widely used artificial sweeteners and is an ingredient in more than 5,000 food products globally. It has an important use in low-calorie beverages such as Diet Coke, as well as other foods including sugar-free gum. It was approved by the US FDA in 1981, but with usage on the rise, it makes researchers question what a safe dosage really is. Even if you think that you aren't consuming artificial sweeteners, you are probably consuming them somewhere in your diet. Some common foods that you might be consuming include light yogurt, which actually contains acesulfame potassium, sugar-free jelly or jam, which contains sucralose, and sugar-free pudding, which also contains sucralose. When we take a closer look at aspartame, some foods that include aspartame include sugar-free beverages such as Diet Coke, which is one of the most well-known items with aspartame and is consumed by so many Americans. Another common use of aspartame is in sugar-free gum, and also many different foods, including this sugar-free syrup, as well as these sugar-free popsicles. So let's take a look at some studies that have been done involving artificial sweeteners and cancer. This first study is a French population cohort-based study. The objective of the study was to investigate the association between artificial sweetener intake, specifically aspartame, sucralose, and acesulfame potassium, and cancer risk. Over 100,000 adults from this French population cohort completed repeated 24-hour dietary recalls, where dietary intake and sweetener consumption data was collected over time. Using this data, participants were categorized as higher consumers if their artificial sweetener intake exceeded the median exposure. The results of this study show an association between increased intake of artificial sweeteners, specifically aspartame and acesulfame potassium, and increased cancer risk. The next study focuses on the relationship between aspartame and cancer in rats. The central goal of this study is to reevaluate the carcinogenic potential of aspartame in rodents, along with assessing the impact of prenatal exposure to aspartame and the effect on rodent offspring. Tumors in these rats were subject to immunohistochemical analysis using a battery of markers. A morphological reassessment of tumors using the most recent internationally harmonized nomenclature and diagnostic criteria was also conducted. After all of this was done, the results of the study show that aspartame is in fact a chemical carcinogen in rodents. The last study that we're going to look at today focuses on aspartame and cancer stem cell enrichment. The goal of this study is to investigate the molecular effects of glucose and aspartame on cancer stem cell population and cancer aggressiveness in the pancreatic 1 human pancreas adenocarcinoma cells. These cells were treated with either glucose or aspartame, and the effects of cancer stem cell population and cancer aggressiveness were assessed. The results of the study show that aspartame exposure increased cancer stem cell population significantly, whereas glucose had no effect on that cancer stem cell population. Aspartame also did not directly induce the formation of tumors, but it could potentially advance existing tumors. So after all of this research is looked at, what is the consensus here? There is evidence that supports an association between increased artificial sweetener intake and cancer risk, specifically with aspartame and acesulfame potassium. There is also evidence that supports that aspartame is a chemical carcinogen in rodents, along with that aspartame can increase cancer stem cell population. However, glucose does not have this effect. And lastly, there is evidence that aspartame can potentially advance existing tumors. So after looking at all of this research, we can come to the consensus that the intake of artificial sweeteners does increase the risk of cancer. Now that you are aware of this, what are some steps that you can be taking to lower that artificial sweetener intake? The biggest thing to do is to find alternate food options in order to lower that intake. If you're looking to sweeten your foods, try using natural sweeteners such as maple syrup or honey. If you're craving something sweet but you don't want to eat a food with lots of added sugar and you would normally opt for a sugar-free option, try eating something such as fruits instead of opting for that sugar-free dessert. Lastly, be very mindful of your intake of sweetened beverages that are marketed as zero sugar, as they probably contain aspartame. Opt for an unsweetened drink, or even better, opt for water, as that's probably the best option on what to drink.